I think we are. Yes. Yeah. We're basically champions. When Discord's having issues, they call us. Let's just say. All right. I'm going to clap, and I think we're good to go. Let me intro. Whoa, 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 whoa. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my show, by the way, just so everyone's straight on this. So this is the Coding with Kalepail session. But today we have a very special guest, the most specialist of guests, my good friend, ElliotFriend. And so last week I was starting to dive into some of the OpenZeppelin stuff, and I'm looking at making some NFTs. And I don't know the next thing about NFTs on Sorbonne. So I reached out to Elliot, who has his Elliot Kitchen, Kalepail Kitchen, where he's been making some NFTs. Looked like he was doing some things beyond what OpenZeppelin had done. Looked like maybe he was actually helping to inform what they should be. So he's becoming like the NFT expert. I learned a lot from him, and I thought it would be a really fun session to have him actually walk us through what he's built and get a little bit deeper into the weeds on the actual NFT contract, the OpenZeppelin stuff, and how he's pulling off these incredible NFTs, generative NFTs on Sorbonne. So I'm going to hand it over to him to just walk us through all the wonderful things he's learned and made, where they come from, and how you too can make some incredible NFTs on Sorbonne, on Stellar. But let's be honest, it's smart contract. Take it away. Haven't seen anything yet. All makes a bunch of sense. So you're uploading all of the metadata. Can you show an example of both a metadata and then an image? Yep, it's awesome. It's definitely not the only way to do it. A lot of the ones that I've seen, whenever you like, it's always been the trick, I guess, when you're doing uh, kind of these PFP type assets, how and when to get the information loaded up into IPFS. And then you've got some that actually load the PNG information into the metadata itself, and then the client is intended to actually generate those images. That's another way to do it. A lot of depends on how complicated it is. I like this method, particularly if your collection is relatively limited, like yours only has 250. Some of these have like 10K or something like that. I do like that there's a lot of flexibility. This one's nice because you can upload everything prior and then sell individual assets or have people minting individual assets, and it won't have to be slow as it generates and then uploads each of those images because that's all been handled prior to the claiming or selling. Yep. Claiming the next index. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. count on it. Yeah, I've seen a bunch that just use IDs. Hexes, yeah, yeah. Yep. Can you jump just real quick? Jump over to GitHub for the OpenZeppelin and just kind of walk us through the OpenZeppelin contracts before we dive into your modifications for them. It should, I think, be in the contract.rs. That's like the index. Yeah. There you go. Yep. Yep. That's cool. Do you know if that's retroactive? Like if I purchase another token after I prove for all, does it will it like retroactively also be approved for that new one, or will I have to call it again for the new one that I just purchased? Yep. Yep. Yeah, it does. It's cool. Mm-hmm. There you go. Mm. And is this to prefix on top of the IPFS URL? Nice. Hmm. Correct. No worries. Yeah. I think it'd be worth pointing out on the OpenZeppelin repo, they have, I think, an examples directory um, where you can, because so some of these I think, yeah, like 4 hours ago. So very new. But they do have a collection of examples um, because essentially what OpenZeppelin is focused on first and what is kind of what we've been waiting for is standards, which basically is just an interface, but it doesn't. So, like, what are the arguments and what are the outputs? And then it's up to the implementer to figure out what the guts of each of those functions are. And that's what you've kind of been walking us through on your side. But those are not unimportant. It's critically important that like you set require auth on the right functions, and if you're doing things like approvals, that you're resetting those if there's transfers. And so I would argue like the interfaces or the SEPs for these things are important, but probably the more important thing is giving people a good sense of some example contracts to use to get some sense of what are the guts supposed to be. And that's what they're doing here in these example contracts, which have tests, and they have both fungible and it looks like now they've got non-fungible examples, which can serve as really good starting points for folks that are wanting to actually make NFTs. So like I've just recently used the pausable example and modified it really slightly. So these are really nice example contracts to kind of get started from. Like for example, when I modified mine, in my constructor, I obviously don't want to hard code the metadata to be www.mytoken.com. I'd want that to be an argument. So I just updated my constructor to accept arguments so that when I'm setting metadata, it's not hard coding to each of those values, but it can be passed in as an argument, which maybe those should be there as part of the example contract anyway, but I think it serves the purpose and helps people encourage like these are not just use as they are contracts. These are things you'll want to modify, but they do serve as a really important. They've got good comments in there on like, make sure if you change this that you also do the require auth, or if you set pausable, make sure you do the unpausable components. You'll see flags like important or keep in mind types of things. So anyway, really, really nice, well-organized contract code. For working not just with the interfaces, but also the guts behind each of the functions. Mm. Right. Yeah. I mean, as far as I know, they use IPFS or Arweave. At least that's been the case for like OpenSea and other ones. I still have a feeling that Facebook is the safest place to put your images if you want them to survive the longest. That'll be around for long. Yes, exactly. I don't know why we need IPFS when we've got Facebook. Those aren't going anywhere. This is super cool. We've got some time left. I haven't seen any questions that folks have. This has been really cool. I'm so stoked to have OpenZeppelin and then the opportunity to grab a hold of some of their example contracts. They've been super engaged in the dev Discord, so definitely want to be chatting with them and helping them understand. I have looked through some of their code, and there's a couple of things that I might suggest that they switch or change like the constructor functions, taking arguments even in the example contracts, just to ensure that we're giving people the best chance at deploying something useful. Do you have, I didn't queue you up for this, but do you have like front end code that you can walk us through to kind of showcase either TypeScript bindings or how you're actually going from like the IPFS side, the front end side, and the actual contract components, like how you're pulling all these different disparate parts together? Mm-hmm. So if you grab that contract ID and open that up in Stellar Expert, yep. I just think it's super helpful for folks to like kind of visualize. So an instance storage is basically a persistent entry that's just a map of keys and values. And what is this used for? This is to populate that index NFTs field. Can you show that real quick? Not the code, the actual on the UI. Yeah, just so people kind of have some idea of. Super cool. Look at that animation. Look at that animation. So clean. Love it. Hmm. Sure. Mm-hmm. 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 Sure. And all those like actions and buttons are using the passkey wallet. Can you show us one of those functions, like when you click on transfer or burn? Because those are calling into your NFT contract, right? Mm-hmm. Who clicked the button? Let me do start the stage and say take two. Who clicked the button? Somebody clicked hang up. Can you hear me? Oh yeah, loud and clear. I don't know if that was a Discord thing or if somebody with permissions accidentally closed the stream, but we're back. It was Nisho. It was Nisho. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. Super simple. Yeah, it works. Um, we have a couple minutes left. I have one question, and that's like, and I don't know if maybe if the um, SEP discussions have covered it, but the way that it works in Classic, if you want to add metadata and have it show up in a wallet, you have to involve the TOML file. What is the current state of thinking when it comes to like having images and stuff show up? Is everybody supposed to just call the token URI or I guess the token the token URI for getting metadata? Is that kind of what we're thinking instead of using the TOML file? Does TOML file have a place still? What's the expectation of wallets for showing your NFT in a wallet? Hmm. Mm-hmm. Interfaces, yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'll be curious how that one trickles down if we end up continuing back into the tummel or if we take the more EVM approach, Ethereum approach, and move things over to like IPFS metadata because it's already in there. And if we're going to follow the standard, it seems like, but now wallets will have to maintain both a toml file flow and IPFS, or not even IPFS, but just looking up JSON data off of some random URL, which is maybe that's fine. The problem is the toml files are assumed to be owned, like what we would, and on a lot of these cases, the contract is not owned, or we don't really want the domain to be owned, or it's upgradable, I guess, which maybe instead of pointing to the token URL, instead of pointing to an IPFS hash or a JSON file points to a toml file, which then has, I can't remember exactly how Fred did it. I think he had it in a toml file, and then the toml file pointed out to a metadata file, or it was in like it was inside one of the data entries or something. I can't remember exactly how he managed it, but it was some sort of weird conjoining of the two, toml file and additional metadata information. But that'll need to get solved probably before too long, because this is starting to harden for sure, which is exciting. But I feel like one of the most important thing for adoption is still missing, which is how are wallets going to handle this. And if you pull wallets in at the very end and they're like, we're not doing this, we're not going to support calling two different URL structures, that could be a bit of an issue. Well, cool. I appreciate you jumping on so much. This was super informative. I'm very bullish on tokens and NFTs, launching more of those, having them be smart contract enabled, more composable, and all that'll be super, super interesting for the future. I think we're really just getting started on what all these things can be, particularly when we start to combine it with the admin stuff, where you can have a whole smart contract that has a whole nother set of additional logic, which is the permissions structure for how things get mined. I mean, you see a contract like Kale, where there's some pretty unique components for how assets get minted, or how the ownership works for that is pretty cool. Definitely something that people should start playing around with. So jump into the OpenZeppelin repos, folks. Keep an eye on their team and how they're getting involved here in our Discord. Elliot, thanks again so much for jumping on. I have lots of AI stuff to share, but it'll have to wait for next week. I'll be working a bit this week to try and make those things a little more stable, doing some MCP stuff that I've really been enjoying. But we'll get to that next week. Maybe, hopefully, allegedly. Unless Elliot comes up with new, cooler stuff, and we'll have to have him on again. All right, have a fantastic rest of the week, everybody, and we'll catch you later.